Years ago, I heard a gardener say store-bought tomatoes taste like disappointment. And I thought, yeah, that is definitely accurate. Times in the winter or when my tomatoes aren't ripe yet, I've been at the grocery store and seen the tomatoes and thought, oh, I'm gonna get some tomatoes and enjoy those. And they might look nice and red and ripe, but you get them home and they are disappointing, to say the least. And it just makes growing tomatoes in your own garden well worth it. And that quote was actually from Jess with Roots and Refuge Farm. She's a really inspiring YouTuber, gardener, and farmer. And I just remember that quote ever since I heard it about store-bought tomatoes taste like disappointment. And homegrown tomatoes really are so delicious. They have so much more flavor. And I just really enjoy homegrown tomatoes. Now, I have had a few tomatoes from my garden that I thought, well, that wasn't super great. Still better than store-bought, but not that flavor that you're really looking for. And then there are other times where I eat tomatoes from my garden, many times, where it's like, wow, the flavor is incredible, the texture is great, they're juicy and meaty, and makes growing tomatoes incredibly worthwhile. It makes that anticipation and waiting for them is worth it. And so often the only time I eat tomatoes is when they are in season in my own garden, and it just makes me appreciate them all of the more. But I did want to share a few things when it comes to tomatoes in your garden, growing them successfully and getting the most flavor. Now, I'm not an expert and we could get into scientific things, but again, that's not my area. I'm just sharing with you my experience with growing tomatoes and what I have learned. So I grow heirloom tomatoes in my garden. Heirloom tomatoes are open pollinated. They've usually been around for at least 50 years. And often they have really unique stories behind why the seeds have been saved for so many years. And I have found that many heirloom varieties are extremely flavorful. They grow well, or they all have some reason. Like, there's a reason that someone decided, hey, these are worth saving and passing down from generation to generation because they're just so delicious, or they grow so well in a certain area. So I like to look up the story, the history, and characteristics behind tomatoes before I grow them. And then I also like to keep notes on the flavors of each tomato and whether or not I would grow them again. There are some I tried and won't grow again, but there are many I have found that I would certainly grow again. Now, before we get into some of the varieties, I do want to share a few things about growing the tomatoes, specifically trellising and pruning. So I like to use cattle panel trellises. These are the cattle panels. They are metal, heavy-duty panels that you can get at places like Tractor Supply and Rural King or other livestock fencing supply companies. And we use T-posts. There's 3 on this 16-foot panel, and then zip ties. You could use wire or other things, but we just use these zip ties to secure them tightly to the posts. And they are very long lasting. We've had this cattle panel for years. We leave it up year round, so you're not, no extra labor taking it up or taking it down and putting it back up. And I like it because it's sturdy, and I just come out and start training the tomatoes back and forth, weaving them up through the panel. Now, the indeterminate tomatoes will eventually reach the top, and kind of you either want to prune them or they'll spill down over, which is fine at this point in the season. So that's one way that we use the cattle panel trellises. And then the other way is in these arches. And in some ways I like the archways better. You're using this overhead space, but as the tomatoes grow and you weave them up through, when they get to the top, they can kind of spill over. And this is a Matt's wild cherry, and it is, as you can see, it's growing crazy. That's just one plant. It's all the way up to the top, and it'll continue growing and come out over. And also this black strawberry tomato back here is doing the same thing. So I like to use them that way. When you do the archway, we put the T-post on either side, and it's helpful if you have two people to bend them and maneuver them into place and then secure them with zip ties. And again, we leave these in place, and I also will use them for trellising cucumbers, melons, pole beans, anything that likes to climb and benefits from being on a trellis. And I have just found, out of everything I've tried, I like this method best. And the cattle panels and T-posts, I think for one section of trellis like this, you know, comes out to like $35 or $40. So very, very cost effective, very efficient, and long lasting. Now, when I prune my tomatoes, so I plant my tomatoes in the spring, and then I try to keep up with pruning them as they grow. And so I try to come out once a week and make sure that they're climbing up through the trellis. I'll gently weave them through, and then as they start growing, I start pruning off the lower leaves and any branches that are going like totally rogue and I can't get back in the trellis. There's not a super detailed method to how I trellis, how I prune, but I do try and make sure I'm removing lower leaves, any leaves that are showing signs of disease or any issues. And with removing the lower leaves, it helps with airflow. It also allows me to interplant other crops along the bottom of my tomatoes, making the most of that space. And I really just try and keep the tomatoes neat and tidy and pruned. It also makes it easier to harvest. It makes it easier to see what's going on with your tomatoes. And again, just throughout the season, I come out once a week, and it's nice because I can just go through the row and in a few minutes have all of my tomatoes pruned, rather than waiting and having a ton of work to do all at one time. All right, so that is kind of how I do my tomatoes. As far as varieties, there are endless possibilities, and every year I try and grow some new varieties, but I also grow those tried and true varieties that I know are super full of flavor. So starting here, I use these tree tags up here. So this is bread and salt ox heart type tomato. Let me walk around the other side so you can see that one there. It's gigantic. But the ox heart tomatoes, they have this heart shape. And they're a very meaty tomato. We've really been enjoying those sliced and on tomato sandwiches. So when you slice them open, they have a lot of meat. So when you slice open a tomato, you'll see kind of the red, or whatever color the tomato is, the flesh. It's more dense, and then there's also the space that's kind of the seeds and the gel and the juice. And tomatoes have different balances. Some have more of the seeds and juice, some have more of the meat. Depends on the type of tomato. These are definitely mostly meat, which in my opinion makes them great for sandwiches. They're still juicy, but also I think they would make a great tomato for making sauce or canning, because they do have that meat to them. And so far they've been a very reliable producer. We've gotten a lot of tomatoes off of this plant. I have one other in the garden too. And the size, as you can see, this is one of the larger ones, but most of them are about that size. I have another one I'll show you in a minute. This is Cherokee Purple. I harvested probably 8 tomatoes off of here already that were all kind of ready at the same time, and there's this one yet, and then it's just starting to get a few more blooms up here. I have to double check. I believe Cherokee Purple is a semi-determinate tomato, so it sets a lot of its fruit all at one time, and that's what I saw to be true this year. But it does look like it's going to continue growing and produce a little bit more. And it's shorter, which again makes me think it might be semi-determinate, because it's not growing quite as crazy tall. Indeterminate tomatoes will just keep growing and keep producing until frost. Determinate tomatoes, they have like a set height and that they'll get to, and a set number of fruit, and they typically produce most of that fruit at one time. All right, so moving along, this is Hillbilly Potato Leaf. This is one of my favorite slicer tomatoes, and it's a great producer of giant yellow tomatoes. So this is one here that's ripe. They are this beautiful yellow with kind of the pink blush to them, and I just think they're really good. They have a really good flavor, and I just like how they look. So that's one that I grow every year. It is a potato leaf variety. So you'll see the leaves on here look different than the leaves on the Cherokee Purple. That's because it's a potato leaf variety, and that's totally normal for that plant. All right, now I have a few tomatoes here I had harvested already, but I wanted to show you. So this is one of the bread and salt oxheart type tomatoes that we looked at first that's ripe. And this is a Cherokee Purple that is ripe. And with heirloom tomatoes especially, but when you're growing tomatoes that come in a variety of colors, one way to tell if they're ripe, because color isn't always an indicator, is how they feel. Now, you don't want to go squishing all your tomatoes, but they should feel soft and juicy, and give slightly when you touch them. So if you're not sure if a tomato is ripe or not, go ahead, and obviously these are going to be very hard, but these are juicy and they give a little bit when you gently squeeze them, and you know that they are ripe. Another thing with ripeness and harvesting is you can harvest the tomatoes when they're fully ripe, and I do that often. But if you're having trouble with critters coming and getting your tomatoes splitting, tomatoes falling on the ground, what you can do is watch for them to start to change color, start to ripen. This one's close. Like if I took this tomato off and took it home and set it on my counter out of direct sunlight, it would ripen. Now this one would not, it's green. But when they start to get this blush and this color to them, you can go ahead and harvest them, and take it home and let it ripen on your counter. It also takes some of the strain off of the plant so that it can produce more fruit. So when I come through and harvest, obviously I'm taking any that are ripe, and sometimes I'll take some that are close, and also I'll take some for fried green tomatoes because they are really good. Like that one I might take for a fried green tomato. All right, so back to our row of tomatoes. This Homestead variety is a new one that I tried this year because it's known to set fruit in a variety of weather conditions, kind of extreme weather. It's known to still produce. And as you can see, it is loaded with tomatoes, and I've already harvested quite a few tomatoes off of these plants. The reason there's two so close together is I planted this one this spring. Something came through and like munched it way off, and I thought, well, there's no way it's gonna survive, but I thought, well, I'll leave it there. I just planted another one right next to it, and turns out it did survive, and it's thriving, and they're doing totally fine planted that close together. So this is a ripe homestead tomato, just a nice red globe-shaped tomato. Some are a little bit larger, but they're mostly this size. So if you're looking for just a basic red slicer that reliably produces, these seem to be a great choice. I'm still a little bit undecided on flavor. I think they do have a good flavor. They're more on the tart side, in my opinion. Not that that's a problem, just definitely seem to be that little bit more on the tart, really acidic side. But they are living up to their expectation as far as being a reliable producer, so they're probably one I will grow again. Moving down the line, oh, here's another homestead tomato, and this is Nepal, and they are just starting to ripen, so I really can't say about those. We really haven't eaten those yet. I think we had one, but I want to wait until some more of those ripen. Again, they're supposed to be more of your traditional red slicer, but they're known to have that really good old-fashioned tomato flavor. So I'll have to let you know on those. I'm gonna take these with us. I'm gonna show you a couple tomatoes over here. These are Sunrise Bumblebee tomatoes here. They're beautiful even when they're green. They get these stripes on and then they turn yellow. They're one of my favorite, well, I should say they turn yellow and kind of this pinkish red. They're beautiful. They have a pretty, they're more on the sweet side when it comes to tomatoes. I love the flavor. I love snacking on these. They're a great producer. The only thing I don't like about them is they do split. They're prone to splitting, especially if we get a lot of rain. But sometimes I'll harvest them early, like that would be one I might harvest, and that would be one back there that I might harvest if I know where to get some rain to prevent splitting. Again, not an issue this year, but this is one of my favorite cherry tomatoes to grow. And then this is the first year I've grown Matt's wild cherry, but I will definitely be growing it again. It is extremely prolific. You can see, you know, it's got these clusters of tomatoes all over it. It's one of the first ones that started producing, and the flavor is really incredible. So they are these, you know, they're pretty small. They're definitely a small cherry. You know, if you look at them next to the Sunrise Bumblebee, a pretty big difference there. But they are loaded with flavor. Now when you bite into them, there's a lot of seeds and juice inside, which is fine, and that's kind of typical of the smaller cherry tomatoes. But they, like, I don't know, just the flavor of these is great. So we've really been enjoying those. They're definitely one that I plan to grow again. All right, and then this is another old favorite. These are black strawberry tomatoes. They are beautiful in all of their stages, and when they're ripe they get this pinkish color to them, but they still have purple. Sometimes they even still have green on them when they're fully ripe. So that's one where you kind of want to feel the tomato, but also their coloring does get slightly duller when they're ripe. So they can be a little more challenging to tell if they're ripe, but that feel is kind of a great way to tell if they're ripe. So again, definitely a favorite here for how they look, and they also taste nice, and they're a really nice size. They're great for snacking, salads, but you can also slice them, so they're really good. And then over here I have another bread and salt ox heart. I have another Matt's wild cherry, and for some reason this one's not thriving as well, but I do know I planted it a little bit later, so I think it will take off here soon. So that is the tomatoes I grew this year. There are a few other varieties that I grow. I know a lot of people like Brandywine. We actually grow Brandywine in our greenhouse, and it's available in the spring for our customers. I just didn't plant any this year, but it is another good, well-known heirloom tomato. So when it comes to choosing heirloom tomatoes, there are tons of varieties out there. I always recommend you try some and then keep notes on which ones you like. Everybody has their personal preference when it comes to tomatoes. So try some of the varieties that I shared. Let me know, comment below, let me know what varieties you always plant in your garden and some that you have tried. I'd love to hear what varieties you like, and even some that maybe you didn't like. Let me know. I always love to hear about that, and I'd love some ideas on what varieties to try next year. A few other things when it comes to flavor, letting them ripen fully, and keeping them stored at room temperature. So one of the worst things that you can do for a tomato is put it in refrigeration. Let them sit out on your counter, let them sit at room temperature, and eat them when they're fully ripe. And that will ensure that you enjoy the best, fullest flavor. All right, again, I would love to hear your comments on tomatoes or any questions that you have, especially about growing heirloom tomatoes. If you enjoyed this video, I would absolutely love if you would go to our website, theheirloomfarmer.com, and subscribe to our email list. That is the best way that you can support our family farm and enable me to make more videos like this. Of course, subscribing to our YouTube channel helps as well. The last thing I will share is we have a giant sunflower field here at our family farm that we open up to the public at the end of August and the beginning of September, and I would love to invite you to come out to enjoy that sunflower field if you're local, and you could also take a look at my garden in person at that time. You can get all of that information by going to our website and also by subscribing to our email list. It will be coming up in just a few weeks, and the field is on the other side of that hedgerow, so you can't quite see it from here. There are just a few starting to bloom, so we think we're pretty much right on schedule for opening August 29th. But again, check out our website, subscribe to our email list, and comment below letting me know your favorite variety of heirloom tomatoes. All right, thank you and God bless.